Please welcome tech columnist Dan Lyons.
Thank you. Hi, I'm just going to stand here at the podium and run some slides. I spoke at the San Francisco version of this event in April and told the story of Fake Steve. And the guys running the conference told me, don't worry, this time it'll be a whole different audience, so you can, tell the same story all over again. So this morning I was at my hotel and we decided to share a car. And I get in the car with two people who are coming here, Brendan Jackson. And the first thing he says is, yeah, I saw your thing in San Francisco and it was great, right? So I'm like, so to everybody who saw the San Francisco one, I apologize deeply. You'll be seeing some of the same stuff all over again. Although some stuff has changed in my life since then, actually a lot. For the one thing, Fake Steve is on hiatus right now. And I'll explain why in a second. The other thing is that after 10 years at Forbes, over the summer I took a job at Newsweek, and this is my first column. It just ran a couple weeks ago. My second column is running soon. And my first column obviously was about Apple. And it occurred to me this morning, like, to be an old mainstream media guy sitting here watching like Ariana Huffington and IAC and ICANN has Cheeseburger. You know what it's like? It's like attending your funeral in advance. Like, you see, like, oh crap. Like, I also noticed, I was traveling this week, but I saw that Fred Wilson gave a very cheery talk about how, this banking crisis isn't going to hurt all the startups. And I'm not going to comment on that. I guess fair enough, whatever, Fred, right? Not that he has a vested interest in that. Anyway, okay, so I'll run through my slides on Fake Steve's story, and I'll tell you how it happened and what I learned from it, and that's about all we have time to cover. So this is what the secret diary of Steve Jobs, right? And as you can see looking at it, it was pretty rudimentary. It was pretty basic, kind of not a very flashy site. Although if you can recall that Newsweek page, there's not that much of a difference, really. The difference is that at Newsweek, my story has to go through 7 editors. Or 7 people, 3 editors, a helper, a lawyer, blah, blah, blah. And it takes a couple days to get that 800 words of sacred text into print, whereas this model is, you get free software from Google, from Blogger, and you throw the stuff up. It's a pretty profound difference. I started it anonymously in June of 2006. And this is the character that evolved, Fake Steve. And it really did become a character for me. It's sort of a character who's not really Steve Jobs and really certainly not me. It was like this alter ego that I got to live with for a couple of years and evolved not really only because of what I was doing, but because of a lot of what the audience was doing. And I really, really miss him. It's been on hiatus since June because Steve Jobs came out looking so sick. And I woke up one morning and I just said, I can't keep doing this joke for now. And I think he's looking better now, and maybe we'll revive it. But that was really what happened. I just woke up one morning after the Worldwide Developers Conference, and I just said, man, I just kind of lost heart or lost stomach. I did intend to take Fake Steve to Newsweek. It had been a Forbes property where they were putting ads on it, and the deal I had with Newsweek was, well, now they'll put ads on it and put it on their website, but I just couldn't do it. Last fall, I published this book called Options, The Secret Life of Steve Jobs, with a great review from the New York Times Book Review saying a thoroughly unlikable narrator, which he is, which I take as a badge of honor. And over the summer, after I shut down Fake Steve, I started this blog called Real Dan, and trying to leverage off the Fake Steve thing. And the reaction has been, like, it's amazing, almost universally, that it sucks. They're just like, I get these emails all the time saying, I don't understand how Fake Steve could be so good and you could be so bad. Like, how can that be? Are you really the guy who did it? Like, 'cause it sucks. Your blog sucks, dude. And I apologize. I think really, I really am much less interesting than Fake Steve as a writer, So there's Fake Steve again with his bong and his laptop, and so the 3 questions people always ask me about this, and I'll sort of whip through in that format, is why, and then why Steve Jobs, and then why does it work? And the last one is the interesting one, so I'll try to get through the other ones fast. So the why was simply, on the one hand, boredom, right? I was at Forbes for 10 years, covering like IBM and EMC and Sun and these big enterprise computing studies. And it's just a horrible job. It's like sticking your hand into a meat grinder. I know IBM is a sponsor of this event, but I'm telling you, as a reporter, covering IBM is like just the worst thing in the world, you know? Terrible. I mean, they have just this huge squadron of PR people who just live to make your life a living hell, right? And who won't ever talk about it. They didn't talk to me for 2 years, and it was my job to cover them, right? So a lot of free time, right? A lot of free time, nothing to do, sitting around like, I'll start a blog. The other one, and the real reason was this, fear, right? I mean, I was covering disruptive technology, so I'm covering Linux, right? And I could see what it's doing to Sun. Suddenly, like, I realized, oh my God, this same thing's happening to my business, right? I mean, if you can get Blogger software and start a newspaper like I did for no dollars and build an audience versus, you know, the pipeline at the print side of Forbes or the print side of Newsweek, that's a, you know, it's a pretty obvious disparity there, right? So my first instinct was to go to Forbes and say, look, can you give me a job on the .com? No. Yeah, can you give me a blog? And no. Because, you know, these media companies are all siloed, right? And the online guys don't really like the print guys or the legacy guys if it's broadcast. They really don't want us. They want their own little thing. And, you know, look at me, right? I'm, you know, 48 years old. They have gray hair. They're like, no, go away, right? You don't get it, right? So I was petrified that I was going to get laid off. I mean, I saw Business Week, Fortune, all the business magazines laying off guys just like me in their 40s. Not the top-end guys, the big editors, and not the little, you know, young reporters, but all the guys who are making decent salaries and with big bylines. And frankly, if I were running a media company, those are the guys I'd fire. I'd fire me too, right? So I thought, I better learn HTML. I better at least know, when I get laid off, I should be able to say, I know how to do HTML, I know how to do a blog, right? It was as random as that. And then I thought, well, what am I going to do? You know, what I write? I could have my own blog, and I did, but nobody read it. But then Jonathan Schwartz had his CEO blog, right? And remember Scoble had this book, Naked Conversations, about companies should just be naked and tell everybody everything that's going on, and the CEO should just tell everything that's going wrong with the supply chain, which I thought was like the most profoundly stupid idea I'd ever heard in my life, right? And I thought it was just ripe for parody. So I thought, I'll do a CEO blog, but my idea will be, it really will be a naked conversation with a really unpleasant guy, right? Like, so it won't be, because Jonathan Schwartz's blog is all bullshit, right? It's all polished up in PR. But what if the guy really went nuts? He was like foaming at the mouth, he's late at night, he's drunk, he's high, and he's blogging, and you can't stop him, right? So that was the conceit, like awesome, right? So, so then the question is, why Steve Jobs? And I don't think, probably I don't have to explain very much to this audience, like why Steve Jobs is ripe for parody, right? But, you know, right, like this, right? So the one thing for me is I'm a huge Apple fan, but Apple's culture cracks me up. Like the way they like to line up for stuff that there's no need to line up for. Like they all have tickets to Macworld, but they line up anyway the night before just to hang out outside out to the Moscone Center. So this year I went to Macworld for the first time, and I want to show you an item I posted on Fake Steve as Steve Jobs. After walking around at 5 in the morning and seeing all these people lined up, and I'm sure some of you people do this, so I'm sorry, forgive me, right? But I think you're lunatics, all right? Of course, then I was out there at 5 watching them, so I don't know who's crazier, right? And so this is my item. Schedule change. Today's group suicide moved up to 3 p.m., right? And wear loose clothing, right? So that was... the other thing that I love about Apple, and I was complaining about covering IBM, but I have to tell you, I never covered Apple until now. Like at Newsweek, I have to cover Apple. Oh my God, like you have no idea what it's like, right? So this is their approach to public relations. That's Katie Cotton. Katie Cotton, Steve's PR manager, running. And then there's just Steve himself. I mean, look at that photo. This is a guy with a tiny bit of an ego, you know, a little bit of self-regard, or as he sees himself in the mirror here. All right, so, right. And I should point out that this is user-generated content, right? The great thing about my blog is that after a while, there were enough people reading it and sending stuff in that they were just doing all the work. I would kind of sit there and surf on it and like check my email inbox every day and get stuff like this. I mean, that's actually pretty well done. I mean, that's not a bad Photoshop. Okay. So the idea would be that it would be a parody of Steve Jobs, like a piss take on a person, but also kind of a parody of blogging itself, of the form, you know, like the rambling, incoherent things or the embarrassing things. And the other issue was, I called it a comic strip, but really what it was like this hybrid form. It was mostly fiction. And before I went to Forbes, I published a novel, a collection of short stories and a novel. And I realized I was kind of writing fiction. I was making up whole scenes or sequences that would take place over days, like Al Gore's wife throws him out, and he has to come live with Steve Jobs, right? And Steve's bummed out because Al's a terrible house guest, and he's eating meat and leading McDonald's wrappers around, and his wife wants him out, and how did they get rid of Al? So it was like a sitcom, right? But the really key thing was I also started covering news, because you just need material. So stuff would happen, and I had this vehicle now for like, oh my God, I can comment on this as if I'm Steve Jobs, right? And there was also the beauty of like some people really thinking I was Steve Jobs at first and writing to Steve asking for features. You know, there's like lots of great pranks you can play. So after about 6 weeks, I shut it down. I was like, okay, fine, I had my fun. And then someone else put it back up, and they were like, I put a meter on it. There were like 1,000 people. So I said, I'm gonna, keep doing this. Well, within a few months, I had like 90,000 people reading it, which is bigger than the first newspaper I worked for out of college, right? And I'm thinking like, that's like the revelation moment when you go like, okay, I've been in media for 25 years, but for no money, no advertising, no promotion, I've got an audience around the world, 90,000 people. Where pretty soon it was 1.5 million people, right? And then I'm freaking out, right? This is like amazing. Also, though, that spurred this hunt to figure out who I was, right? And there was this guy in Silicon Valley who had a blog, and he's like offering a reward. The whole valley's in an uproar. Who could this be? Blah, 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 blah. Right? This is really cool, except that he was the publisher of Forbes. He was my boss, right? This is true. And then Rich Carlguy, he's a friend of mine, right? And even worse, like he kind of had figured out it was probably someone on the East Coast. I live in Boston. They figured out it was East Coast because of the timestamps. They're thinking, probably around Boston. Who on the East Coast knows about tech and can be fun? Like they're looking right at me. They still didn't get it. That's like how invisible I was at Forbes. Like what a lousy employee I was there, right? So. Even better, Rich Carlguy starts writing to fake Steve, sending me story ideas. Like, hey, I heard of this gossip in the Valley. Like, he's sending me tips. Then, absolutely true, he offers me a job at Forbes.com, right? The same guys who wouldn't hire me like 6 months before, right? So I'm like, oh, this is great. Except I'm thinking like, I'm dead too, right? So I wrote back like, well, how much would that pay? And then that, of course, that's when everything fell apart. Anyway, I told them who I was. We made a deal. Fine, we'll put ads on it. We'll call it a Forbes.com site. And we did that for a year, and it did pretty well. However, right as we were about to launch as a Forbes thing, I got outed. The New York Times figured it out. This guy, Brad Stone, who I've become friends with, figured out, and that was his story, Fake Steve Blogger Comes Clean. And my story on it was, damn, I am so busted, yo, right? Like this little dog getting arrested, right? And because I did figure, you might as well fall on the sword. Once you're caught, you're caught. I knew I wouldn't lie about it. And I was sort of relieved because it kind of sucked living this double life, and this having to lie. And also a lot of people knew. So I was like waiting for the axe to fall. And by then, at least 100 people I knew that I was doing this blog. So that leads me to the question of why does it work? And I'll get through this quickly. Because I thought, and a lot of people thought, that once you're outed, it'll be over. The guy running Forbes.com said, if you're ever outed, it's fun as an anonymous thing, but it won't work. But the amazing thing is it did still work. And that's when I couldn't figure out what's going on there. Why is that working? People were willing to suspend their disbelief and still pretend it was fake Steve, because they always knew someone was writing it. The other thing, though, I think was the audience, right? And that's a picture of Linux fans that I got off Google. What I realized is that I went on this book tour for my book last fall, and I met all these people who were readers of the blog. And we would have events, like, weren't even set up by the publisher. It wasn't at a bookstore. It was just some fake Steve reader would rent out a bar. 30 people would come, would hang out. And I realized it's the community. Like, they can send me a link, and I put it up and put their name in, So I call it sort of consume and create. But basically, it's nothing new to this audience. But the idea that people, it would almost be like being able to write to you see Doonesbury, the comic strip, and it's sort of a smart, funny comic strip. If you could write to them and say, or write to Gary Trudeau and say, here's an idea, and the next day it shows up in the paper with a little shout out to you, saying your name is in the paper, that was sort of the thrill for people, only it didn't even take till the next day. It was like immediately. And I would hear story after story of people running around in their company, saying, that's me. I'm the guy who sent that thing into Fake Steve. I had this guy called Fake Vladimir Putin, and I'm going to wrap up quickly, but Fake Vladimir Putin was a guy who started commenting on all these stories. He was really funny, he was brilliant, really, really funny, and he wrote English in a kind of Russian broken English in this like really, really good way. My wife is a Russian speaker, and she verified for me, like whoever this is actually knows how Russians speak English, right? And the key thing was, he doesn't have his own blog. He doesn't have his own site. He only existed in my comment string. And then there was another guy named Fake Noam Chomsky, right? And he was also really good. And think about it, how smart you have to be able to channel Noam Chomsky, right? And they would have arguments, and then other people would jump in, and, and I would just stand back. Like, and I realized what I had created really was a performance space, that's really what this was about. And for that matter, I sort of think that's what Twitter and Facebook are. In a sense, they're performance spaces, that's what people are doing on those sites. I'll wrap up just by saying that I've come to believe that the key for media companies crossing this chasm is finding some way to reproduce that. I mean, my blog was very, very primitive, very raw. But if you can reproduce that interaction, that interactivity, that sense of people having a role in it, I think that's going to be the key. And the companies that survive that cross are going to be the ones who are, it'll be dictated by the degree of openness, the degree to which they can give up their old ways of doing things and allow that in. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks.